Welcome to the Wordsmith Forge Christian Fiction Podcast. This is where you meet the authors that you like to read and ought to read. Well, I'm glad you've joined us for this episode. I'd like you to welcome John Galt Robinson. John, thank you so much for joining us on the Wordsmith Forge Christian Fiction Podcast. I'm excited to have you tell our viewers about yourself and your books, introducing yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Mike, and it's good to be here. My name is John Robinson. I run under my full name, John Galt Robinson. For those of you who may recognize the name John Galt, I was named after Ayn Rand's hero of her epic novel, Atlas Shrugged. My dad read it. It was published in, I believe, 1957. He read it shortly after it was published, and after reading the book, he said, if I ever have a son, I'm naming him John Galt Robinson. And then he had 4 daughters before I came along. But anyway, so that's who I am. I'm an ER physician by trade. I've always been an avid reader. Ever since I first picked up a copy of S.E. Hinton's The Outsiders back in 7th grade. It was required reading, and I think I read it 3 more times that year, along with several other books. And reading has always been a passion. It's the same with my wife. And probably about 10 years ago, I think it was, my wife and my younger daughter started telling me I should write books. And at first, I kind of scoffed. I was like, I'm a math and science guy. I'd like to read, but essays was never my thing. And high school, that was me, and I played sports, and other than reading, I had no interest in English class. But the idea kind of grew. I started praying about it, and I would think about it, and I don't want to just write what other people write, and I'm just not that original or that creative. And I think I would think about it a little bit more. I got a little bit more serious about it, but I couldn't come up with anything on my own. And I think it was July of 2018 at 4 o'clock in the morning. I woke up and I had the first book, this book right here, Forces of Redemption, in my head. And I literally got out of bed. I went into my office. I pulled out a legal pad and I wrote down about 2 pages worth of notes. I prayed over it. And the next day I started researching. And here I am, 4 published books, 3 more written books, and more to go. So it's amazing what God can do. He always picks the least likely candidate, just like David wasn't even considered. They left David out in the field when they were looking to anoint a king when Samuel came by. And after going through all of his brothers, they finally said, well, there's David out in the field. We could try him. And that was who it was. And same with Gideon. And I'm the least likely candidate to write. If it wasn't for God inspiring, I couldn't write a single page. And here we are. So God's amazing.
Yeah, it definitely is. He does amazing things. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about your walk with Christ, if you don't mind.
Sure. I was raised in Western New York, on Grand Island, New York, right above Niagara Falls. You could stand on our dock and literally see the mist rising up from the falls. We were right on the river. It's a very Catholic area. We attended a Catholic church. My mother was pretty devout. My father wanted nothing to do with church. So I was typical young Catholic teenager. I went to church more out of a religious obligation, but wasn't serious about it. Then God orchestrated my path. I wanted to be career military. I applied to the Naval Academy. I should have gotten in. I was actually recruited to play lacrosse there, and for some reason I didn't get in. And I ended up at Georgia Tech. I went there for a Navy ROTC scholarship. I didn't get the scholarship, so I went in as a volunteer for Navy ROTC, but I didn't care. I just wanted to be career military. But it was at Georgia Tech, my freshman year. I was on a floor with several Christians. They were great guys. And just like guys at a young age do, they'll stay up late at night talking about life. And they witnessed, and we would argue. And that spring, I felt convicted enough that for Lent, as a good Catholic boy, I would read the Bible for the first time. So they recommended I read, I think it was the Gospel of John. And I read through that every day for Lent, and I was convicted. Not enough to accept Christ at that time, but I realized I'm not knocking the Catholic Church. I know people in the church that legitimately walk with Christ, but I had never learned anything. I had never heard the gospel. And it wasn't until the following year, I was in a different dorm that year, and it was the athletic dorm, And there was a gentleman by the name of Bart Jones. He had just graduated. He played defensive back for the Yellow Jackets, and he was coming back and leading a Bible study. He was part of a ministry called Forerunners for Christ, and he would go around and invite you to Bible study. And I'm kind of introverted. That just wasn't my thing. So I always like, yeah, I'll go, but I never went. And then it was October of '87. I was coming back from the gym. I'd just gotten done working out. He got on the elevator with me, and he's like, hey, there you are. When you come to my Bible study? I'm like, he's, well, we're about to have it in 15 minutes. What are you doing? And I was kind of caught. I'm like, okay, I'll be there. So I went more out of obligation, but it stuck. I was really impressed. My impression of Christians at the time was they're these weird, geeky, hippie type people. And Bart wasn't anything like that. He was a regular guy like me, and we just talked the word, and God opened my eyes, and literally a month later, he led me to receive Christ. And I've never changed. And I thought I was going to be career military, but my grades were terrible, even though I was studying. I ended up back in Buffalo, University of Buffalo, and I enrolled with the Marine Corps at that time to get my commission through something called Platoon Leaders Course. But then a year later, I broke my ankle, and that was it. My military aspirations were over, so I had to find something else to do. So I became a certified athletic trainer. I was in the sports medicine program. I stayed on and got my graduate degree, and that was when I met my wife at church. And shortly after graduating, there was no jobs for athletic trainers in Buffalo. It was still a limited field in 1994, so we ended up in rural Tennessee. And I worked in a physical therapy clinic in the day, and I took care of 4 athletic programs in the afternoons. This is a little town called Lawrenceburg, Tennessee. And a few years later, I was looking to go back to get my physical therapy license. It was pretty much the same as athletic training, but it would double your certification. It would double your salary, give you better hours. We were having kids. My hours as an athletic trainer were terrible. My pay was terrible. But the physical therapy programs wouldn't take me. They were like, nope, you have to go for the full 6 years now. They were going into a graduate program instead of just bachelor's. Yeah. And so somebody's like, well, have you thought about medical school? And my wife and I, again, laughed. I'm like, no, my grades were never that good. But we prayed about it, and we really felt like this is the path we're supposed to go. So I started taking courses, and my boss, his name is Vernon Sides, God bless him, let me have some time off during the mornings that I could go. There was no schools nearby. You had to drive an hour to get to a community college to take a biology or a chemistry or a physics. And he was letting me do that, or I was taking night classes too. But at that point, I was getting A's, and I'd never gotten A's like that before. And I got into medical school first shot, and here I am, 20 years later, a doctor, author, father, grandfather, and all I could say is, when I look back, all the things I thought were setbacks and disappointments in my life was God ordering my steps, and I have no regrets. And, I think of the verse when Jesus says, he who puts his hand to the plow and looks over his shoulder is not fit for service in the kingdom of God. And that's part of it. I don't look back with regret. I look forward. What do you want me to do next? And it's been a wild ride, and who knows where God's taken this, with the books, with being a doctor. Who knows? But all I can say is I'm here because God is awesome, and he orchestrates my steps.
Yeah. What a great story. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Sure.
That's like when the children of Hebrew stood on the mountain and God said, everything you see, where you put your foot will be yours. But he said you have to put your foot on it. He didn't say you can stay here and it'll all work out. You gotta go down and claim it. And when he makes a way for you, it's a lot easier than struggling against the current. That's amazing. I appreciate that story.
And to that point, my youngest daughter, her name is Jordan, and she's named after Jordan chapter 3. That was the account where God told Joshua and the priests to step into the Jordan River to cross before they went to go defeat Jericho. But the Jordan was at flood stage at that time, and it was intimidating. But he didn't hold the water back first. He said, step into the water. They had to take that step of faith, and then God held the water back. And then they were able to cross over to the other side. And at the time, I was actually not having cold feet, but just wanting to make sure my wife and I were engaged. We're getting close to getting married. And I was like, God, is this the person you want for me? I don't want to go down a wrong path. And he kind of put it on my heart. I was reading Joshua chapter 3, and it's like, okay, is this what you're telling me? And then literally the next week, the pastor that was doing our premarital counseling, he's an associate pastor, he's never in the pulpit, he was in the pulpit the next week, he taught on that very chapter. I'm like, okay, message received. So our younger daughter is named Jordan, though. But just to your point, it's about taking that step of faith. I agree.
Yeah, yeah. No, and you know, I'm sure with the journey you've completed to this point, if you had foreknowledge and you knew the mountain you were going to climb, you probably wouldn't have taken that step.
Probably not.
And so God prepares us in ways where we don't have full knowledge, and then we get into something and you start having doubts. But trusting in God, if that's the plan He has for you, boy, there's nothing like that.
Absolutely.
So you still live in Tennessee?
No, we are in Columbia, South Carolina. Actually, a little town just northwest of it called Irmo. We live on a lake called Lake Murray. I grew up sailing. I don't live expensively, but the one thing I'll always be near water where I could sail again. So that's where we settled. I came here for residency. I went to medical school in Johnson City, Tennessee, in East Tennessee State, where my new series that has yet to be published will be taking place. But after I graduated medical school, you have to go into residency. That's your specialty training. Right. And you apply to several residencies, and it's kind of a match process. You rank where you want to go. They rank who they want based on who they interviewed. And it goes in the computer and spews out what's called a match. And I ended up in Columbia. No regrets. It was the best training I could have gotten. We have 3 interstates that come through here. Nobody knows how to drive, so we saw tons of blunt trauma. And we have an active gun and knife club, so we see penetrating trauma. We have drug addiction. We have HIV. We have a very sick population. And after 3 years of that, you can pretty much handle anything. And by the time my kids were established here, they got into ice hockey and figure skating, and nobody wanted to move. So I still live here. I actually work an hour and 20 minutes away at a different hospital. That I love it, but we still live where we live. But probably staying here.
My next question was going to be, what of God's creation is close to you where you like to go and recharge your batteries or just cleanse your soul? And I think you've already answered that.
Yes,
you
sir.
Live next to a lake and are quite content to drive an hour so you can be where you're at peace.
Absolutely.
So just to kind of round things out, and this might be an odd question, but what are your 3 favorite movies?
Oh, good question. I'm going to have to say Miracle, which was the story of the 1980 U.S. Olympic hockey team. I think it came out around 2001. Starred Kurt Russell. I still get chills watching. I remember watching those games when I was a kid. I was, I think, 12 years old at the time, and they did it so well in the movie. But definitely Miracle. The Hunt for Red October, still probably my favorite book. And, you know, I'm one of those people who most of the time you read a book and you see the movie and you're severely disappointed. The movie just doesn't come close to the book. And this doesn't touch the book, but it was still extremely well done. And I can remember the first time I sat in a theater and it opened up with the Russian music playing, and there's the Red October, and there's Sean Connery as Captain Ramius. And I just had chills. And I still get it to this day. I've probably watched that movie 200 times, and I'll never get tired of watching that movie. Boy, after that, there's so many good ones. But, you know, I think of Remember the Titans, you know, some of the true-to-life movies. The Rookie, any one of those could definitely match up there as well. But I would also put up there the series like the Band of Brothers series and the Pacific, and I'm currently watching Masters of the Air. You know, they're full of language, which I wish they could skip, but I understand they're being authentic to the story. They're true-to-life stories. Band of Brothers specifically, I think, was extremely well done, and so I do enjoy watching that too.
Well, that I agree with some of your picks there. That you just love to see people that accept a challenge and overcome it.
Absolutely.
The odds. You've already kind of covered what inspired you to become an author. It sounds like you just had a story and you had to tell it.
Like I say, the interest was there. I didn't have the story. I can only say God gave me the story. And I'm just, ever since then, every time I sit down to write, I start in prayer first, that God would inspire. If there's one thing I've learned over life, and what the scriptures show, is when we empty of ourselves so that God can come in and take over, he could do amazing things. David couldn't have beaten Goliath on his own. He could only do it through God. Samson, you name it, Gideon. And it's the same thing with the writing. I really go in there humbly, realizing I don't have any writing talent. Now, I'm learning. I'm doing a lot of things. I'm working with an editor that's teaching me to improve the craft. I think God does expect us to do that and to better ourselves and to train. So I don't want to say no talent, but I couldn't do it without God. So every time I sit down to write, I pray that he would inspire. But my second book, too, that one, I was querying the first book, and it was during COVID. And I think I queried every agent in the United States, every agent in Canada, and it was July, and I was just starting to query the United Kingdom agents. It was the middle afternoon. I was tired. I just laid down, took a nap, and I woke up, and I had the second book in my head. It was called Power City.
Right.
Now, since then, I haven't really had any dreams about the next ones, but it's taken a life of its own since then. God gave me two great characters in my first series. Joe Shannock, he's a Navy SEAL, and then Christy Tabrizi, she's an ER physician. And they're just such dynamic characters, and there's so many stories with those two, and so many things I can see them doing together, and they inspire each other. And I think now at this point the stories are unlimited, and it's the same with my new series too. My new Nate Kelsey series, I see a lot of potential in those as well. But I don't look too far ahead. I just take it one book at a time and pour everything I have into it, and when we get done, I can sit back and I like that story.
Are you traditionally published, or are you independently?
No, my first 4 books were with a small publisher, KCM Publishing. It was Michael Fabiano. He's in New York City. He's a vice president with Associated Press. So I picked up with him right at the end of 2020 through a friend of a friend that was published with him. But it's kind of the boutique publishing way of going. But now what we are doing, I'm working with a new editor, and he's pretty well placed. He runs a website called The Real Book Spy. He's a Christian author himself, and he has been really, in the past year and a half since we've gotten to know each other, he has put me through graduate school as far as the trade and craft of writing, what agents look for, what publishers are looking for, where the market is. Like my first book, Forces of Redemption, I wrote it very much in a Tom Clancy style. I get into really good description, plot building, character building. But today's readers don't like that. Today's readers are the TikTok generation. So they want shorter, faster chapters that leave you hanging. And then the very next chapter, you have to ground the scene. You have to drive the point of view of the character. Those were all, I just basically wrote what I wanted to read before. And I patterned it after some of my favorite authors, Tom Clancy, Vince Flynn, Clive Cussler. And so when I read those books, I look back, I'm very happy with what I wrote. But when I see the little nuances of what the trade and the craft is, and okay, now I see why I need to improve this. And so that's what I'm taking my first 4 published books, and I'm revising each one. Not the stories, not the plot. Just cleaning up each chapter, streamlining some things, putting all those little technical details in there, making sure that I'm not head hopping in the same scene from one character to the next, things like that. Those are things that I've really learned majorly over the past year and a half, and we're going to put those back up. They're published now, but we're going to reissue them on my website. But at the same time, the new series is what we're going to go with agents. We're about to start querying with the first book. It'll be my Nate Kelsey series. And the working title right now is called Odin's Spear, but we're probably going to change that. But we're going to start querying that soon and trying to get with a traditional publisher that way. And then we'll see. If it goes well and those books do well, then they might be interested in my other series. If not, I'll keep my other series independent. I've had an amiable parting of the ways with Michael Fabiano and KCM, and he told me from the beginning when I first signed the contract, he said, I'm not going to get you to the big level. He said, I'm here to help you get published, but if you ever get to the point that you want to break away and do something on your own, he said, there's no hard feelings, and just let me know. And that's what we did. And he gave me reversal of all rights back to me in my 4 novels. I couldn't have asked for a more fine gentleman to have worked with, but he was limited in what he could do, and he was very upfront and open about that from the beginning. So currently I'm independent, but taking my new series to agents this month, and we'll see where it goes from there. It's in God's hands.
Interesting, and I think any of our aspiring authors out there, their ears perked up when you started talking about how you've published your books and what you're trying to do with them now.
It's a learning process. I was blessed last year with the opportunity to go out on one of our newest nuclear submarines, the USS Indiana.
Oh, wow.
And that's going to be the subject of my 6th book. It'll be called Silent Victors. My 5th book is about to come out in my current series, but when I was out there, I happened to be able to go with Brian Andrews and Jeff Wilson, and they write several series, including a Christian fiction series called The Shepherds. They're amazing writers. They have just started writing, taking over the Tom Clancy novels. They just published their 2nd one of the Tom Clancy, the Jack Ryan Sr. genre, and they're amazing guys. They're super great. They're very helpful and have been very encouraging to me. But to your point, Brian Andrews, one day we were actually sitting in the wardroom on the Indiana, and he and I were just talking about getting published, and I asked him what they did to get published, and he said, it's like sitting in a stadium with 80,000 other people, and everybody has a good book to read. He said, but only 2 or 3 people are going to get their book put up on the screen, and they're all screaming, hey, read my book, read my book. He said, there's no rhyme or reason to it. He said, a lot of it is timing and who you connect with. He said, you could send it out to 20 different agents, and they all don't even look at it. And then one agent takes a look at it and thinks, we might have something here, and that could be the key. And who's it? J.K. Rowling. I haven't read the Harry Potter series, but she was rejected, I think, 12 times, as was Tom Clancy. And those are 2 of the most prolific authors of all time now. So I think you keep trying, and it's up to God. Very quickly, when I was writing the first novel, when I was thinking about that, one of my beta readers, who's one of my closest friends, his name's James Blake, and I trust him. I trust him to read the book and give me honest criticism. And he sent it back and gave me a lot of good feedback. And he said, where do you want to go with this? And, because I put a theme in my book. I put a message. I have 2 main characters. And in the first book, Joe Oceanic is an agnostic, but Christy Tabrizi is a Christian. And they will meet in the first book. But part of that, and part of the vision from that dream I had, was that they would be put in a situation, a rescue situation, but in there'd be dialogue where they're discussing God. And Joe Oceanic, being agnostic, has many of the worldly objections to God that we hear. While I can't believe in a God that would allow evil, I've been a Navy SEAL for 8 years, and all I've seen is evil. How could a God exist when you don't know the evil I've seen? But Christy has an answer for it.
Yeah.
And, I wrote that in a way that my books could appeal to both Christian readers as well as the skeptics, the secular reader. I don't want them to say, oh, there's a Christian book, and put it down. They've got a lifeline. Right. And so they have Joe's point of view that they can hold on to, but they're hearing Christy's point of view, and they may never hear that before. So there's a witness in there. And, that's one of the things I always pray, is that if it just plants a seed and allows someone to start thinking, and maybe makes them right for someone else to witness to. As Christ said, one man plows the ground, another man sows the seed, another one nourishes the seed, and another one reaps the harvest. Whatever role it plays in there, it doesn't matter. God's the ultimate harvester. But so anyway, James had asked me, where do you want to go with this? I said, well, obviously you write something, you want it to be well received and to do well, but if after all this is done, they only reached one person, and it just played a small role, but that person did come to Christ through whatever role God allowed me to play in it, and it only reached one person, it would still be worth it. But if it reaches 1 million people, that's great too. I'm not going to complain.
And I think there's a big difference between face-to-face having a discussion or argument as opposed to, say, an agnostic reading someone that takes their position and then they actually consider the other position instead of having to defend it themselves. So I think there's a lot of value in there. And I think we're missing the boat if we shy away from recognizing that not everyone is ready to be convinced.
No. Our job is to bring the gospel to them. It's God's job to sign the deal.
Yeah, I don't think God has told us to kick the door down.
No, although it's tempting to do sometimes.
Certainly.
You read a book and you like it and you tell someone else about it. And to that note, my editor has been telling me that's why you have to write books that women want to read. Even if it's going to be a male-type book with action and adventure, you want to write it in a way that women want to read it. So that's why one of the big things now is they want you to get into the character's head. You want to hear internal narrative, that internal monologue, because what do women want to know? They want to know what the guy's thinking. So because if a woman reads a book
for a long time,
yeah. Well, because my wife's always happy. What are you thinking? Usually I'm in my nothing box, like nothing.
Yeah.
It drives her nuts.
You thought about that yesterday.
But if a woman reads a book and likes it, she's more likely to tell her friends or her book club or whatever. Whereas most guys are like, yeah, it was a good book. They might tell someone. Yeah. So the marketers, the publishers, when we're getting towards that side of the trade, yes, that's what they want. They want a book that's going to appeal to both men and women. Or just women. A book that appeals to just men, they're probably going to pass on. But if you can write it to both. And I never thought about that from the beginning anyway. I just, like I said, the story kind of came to me. I give God the glory, but my books are definitely books that are, I'd say I have equal readership, men and women, and definitely enjoyed by both. And I think both of my characters can appeal to both. Christy isn't just solely for women. A lot of my male readers just love Christy. My former publisher said, you've penned the ideal woman in my life. So, anyway, that's just where it is.
Well, I think if you set out to make a living or a fortune writing a book, your book is not going to be very good.
Exactly.
Because it's written for the wrong reason, and and your aspiration will most likely not be filled. So,
you're so right. Yep. Put the passion into it. And that's why I don't think, now they say AI can generate a book in a couple of hours. Well, I don't want to read that book. I don't care how clever and how intelligent AI is. I don't want to read that book. I want to read the book that an author slaved over. There'll be times I agonize over a single sentence of dialogue because I want it to say it just right, or a description. And I want to read somebody else's book that they poured their heart into, that they passionately wrote. Like I said, I've mentioned Brian Andrews and Jeff Wilson before. That's something those guys do. They are just passionate about their writing. I saw it firsthand when we were in the submarine, and Brian Andrews just was taking note after note after note. And he was a former submarine officer. But they took it, and they took the mantle of the Tom Clancy novels, and they took it very seriously, which to me is a daunting task. You're talking one of the greatest thriller series of all time. And you've got to assume the characters and write in a manner that's true to the characters, or you're going to disappoint the readers. That's an overwhelming task, but they did it. They approached it with passion, and I don't think AI could ever do that. And I don't want to read anything by AI. So I agree with you. It's from the beginning, your focus should be the story, not money, not anything else. It should just be the story. Right. And if it works out, great. But otherwise, keep your day job. I haven't quit my day job.
What would you say about reviews? The reviews that, let's see, Amazon.
Mine personally, or the necessity of them?
The necessity and how you get them and where they come from. I like Amazon wrote a summary of what customers say about forces of redemption.
Okay.
And Amazon said customers find the book engaging and hard to put down. They appreciate the author's knowledge of the subject matter, detailed research, and relatable characters. The moral compass and story of values resonates with readers. Overall, customers praise the writing quality as great and well done. What a complimentary review and a summary of your reviews that Amazon put together for your book, Forces of Redemption. But reviews don't come easy. It's been my experience.
No.
And I think they're important.
I do too. I make it a point to write a review and not just put 5 stars or 4 stars. I make it a point to write up what I see. Especially now as an author, I want to put in what I liked about the story, what I thought about the trade craft that they put into it. So I'll write a look because I enjoy reading that. And I'm very open, and you may have seen some of the posts on the Facebook pages. When people read my books, I tell them, hey, reach out to me, tell me if you liked it or didn't like it. And if you didn't, tell me what you didn't like. It can always get better. I look at my first novel. I'm very happy with that story, but it needed work. I'm going back and revising it. I don't think we can ever stop learning. But when I get reviews and they're very complimentary, sure, that's gratifying. Yeah, you want to hear that. But I have had a few people write me, and one person actually honestly said, with my first book, said, in all honesty, the first few chapters were hard because in the first few chapters, I spent too much time establishing the cartels. And they were short chapters, but it was showing how ruthless the cartel, it was a new cartel that was taking over. And every chapter was actually taken out of a news clip that I'd read. It was a fictionalized version of something I'd read in the news of what these cartels had done. But it was too long. And so in the new book, I've trimmed a lot of that fat and I've screened it down. But somebody honestly said that was too much there. I'm like, good to know. And my wife actually said that. She's my toughest critic. So I really like the reviews, both for good feedback and negative feedback, as long as it's constructive. One person gave me a 1-star review that they didn't like the faith content. And I'm like, well, that's unfortunate because probably 1% of the novel is faith content. The rest of it's a story. And, you have the faith content of Christy Tabrizi is the primary Christian, but the rest of the people really aren't. And, it's how she influences others. But, so it was just, that was just a negative reaction. And you're going to get those too. So you have to be able to take the good with the bad. But if you're willing to be objective and willing to listen to objective opinions, I think reviews are very good. They make you a better author. Let alone the more reviews we get, the higher we go up in the algorithm, and everything's algorithms now on the internet and social media. So the more reviews people take the time to write, they help us. They help us get more exposure and sell more books and get it into other people's hands. So I'm a big proponent of reviews for that reason.
I'm a skeptic if a book has all 5 stars. I think, wow, that author has a lot of family and friends. That's where they come from. So I appreciate a 4 and 3s. I have to really read those and scratch my head and wonder how that represents things. I had one review that said, I really liked the gospel message, but my non-Christian friends would be turned off. Right. I said, well, if they're turned off, that means they read it.
Right.
So I'm fine with that.
Yeah. Yeah. It still plants a seed, whether it's accepted or not. But to that point, I really appreciate it when I get a review from somebody I don't know.
Right.
Because yes, I do have family and friends that have written reviews, and you wonder, are they just being really complimentary because they know me, or is this an honest review? And I trust most of them to be honest with that. And my wife, like I said, she can be brutally honest. She'll read the books before they get published, and she really saved my character in the second book. She's like, Christy would never do this. She would never say this. And I'm like, you are so right. I can't believe I wrote it like that. And so I went back and rewrote a part. So I really covet the honest feedback, and my beta readers do the same thing. But it is very gratifying when you get a review from somebody you have no idea who they are, and they gave you an honest read on that. Like, okay, that's what that means a lot to me. When somebody takes the time to read a book, put a review, and get the feedback from that. Is
there any part of your writing that you consider really challenging?
Yeah, of course. Research is the big thing. I'm meticulous for the details. being an ER physician, I can't stand watching any medical drama. I don't watch a lot of TV, but everybody said, "Oh, you need to try Grey's Anatomy." I didn't make it through one episode. Pretty much any of those medical shows. One, they're just too racy now, but two, it's the content. Like, well, they would never do this. Or you watch a movie and somebody's in a coma and they're just laying in a bed comfortably with a little nasal cannula in their nose. Like, that's not realistic. They'd have a tracheostomy, they'd be on a vent, and they'd look terrible. Same with every war drama. Oh, we got to get the bullet out. We never take the bullet out. I get gunshots, and if the bullet is still in the person, it stays in the person. We don't try to dig it out. It's not going to cause an infection. So, those things drive me nuts because, you could have gotten a third-year medical student that would have set the record straight. It's not that hard, but so I'm a meticulous person for the details. So even the medical parts, I'll sometimes have to go check in my medical book. Am I doing this right? The medical knowledge changes year in, year out. But the hard part for me was the special forces. My other character's a Navy SEAL. Yeah, I wanted to be career military. Yes, I've read tons of books on military. Yes, I've done a ton of research, but especially the Navy SEAL community, they're very tight-lipped. They do not really talk about what they do. And when you want to get detailed, that's the hard information. You can't find it online. And I've been blessed. I have a couple of contacts now that are active duty Navy SEALs, and they don't want their names out there. But they have been very willing participants in helping me, and down to the details. Like, we would wear this kind of footwear, like black high-top Converse All-Stars in a water operation because they drain the water out really well, and the fins go over them well. But nobody else would ever know that. So it's even little details like that are huge. But that's the challenging part, is getting that information and to be accurate and authentic.
That certainly makes the reader realize that you put a lot into this.
Or every movie you see, they come out of the water with a rifle, and that water comes up out of the water. It doesn't work. They'd have to clear they have to drain the water out of their bulk carrier group, otherwise it's not going to work. So they actually have what's called a waterproof shoot-through bag that they, once they get ashore, they'll take it out of that bag, but when they're under the water, it's in a shoot-through, and they can actually shoot through it, but it's waterproof. But so even like a Navy commercial, when you see the SEALs come out of the water with a rifle, that's not totally accurate, but those are little details you would never know. And that's the time-consuming part. Is sometimes I will spend 2 hours trying to find one little factoid that it's like, well, I really should put this in, but I don't know the truth on it. And then, fortunately, I've got some people I can call on now. But the first couple of books, I didn't have that. I've developed those contacts. Same with FBI and CIA, the police detectives. So now it's a little easier that I can bounce it off of them. Or my latest book, I've got several Navy career submariners that are helping me. But that's the challenge. And then the craft, like opening a chapter. It used to be easy to just describe what you're seeing and everything. Well, that's not how it's supposed to be done. You're supposed to ground the scene in the character's point of view, establish that character's point of view right away. What are they seeing? What are they doing? And, you want to make sure that you show, not tell. And for those who may not know what I'm talking about, I could say, Mike's arm itched. That's telling. Or I could say Mike scratched his arm. That's showing. The reader enjoys it when you show and you appeal to their imagination. But it's easy to tell. And sometimes I have to stop and I'm telling here. I'm not showing. I have to go back and rewrite this part. So a lot of challenges, actually. But it's fun because it's like taking a raw piece of art and sculpting it, and then it looks pretty good, but then you go back and you really buff it up and make it look like something great. So it's challenging, but it's rewarding when it's done.
Any funny or surprising incidents that have taken you off guard?
As far as surprising incidents, no. I meticulously plan out my writing, but it will not always follow the course. I forget who it was. There was an author that one time said, and this is a great quote, he said, writing a book is like driving a car in the middle of night in fog. You can only see as far ahead as the headlights go, but you will eventually get to your destination. And every time I start a book, I have a beginning and I have an end in mind, and I have waypoints along the way. And I've even outlined a couple of books, like detail, outline, chapter by chapter. I have yet to follow one. As you're going along and you're writing, like, oh no, we really ought to do this. Or sometimes I'll get to a point like I should have done this, and I'll go back and rewrite a chapter 8 chapters earlier so I can change the outcome. And my third book, Lost Angels, I broke a rule. You're not supposed to leave a reader hanging at the end of a book. And I did it in that book. But I originally had the happy ending. They're supposed to usually end. But it just kept gnawing at me. It's like, oh, I really ought to end it this way. So I wrote 2 endings to it, and then I sent it out to my beta readers, thinking they're not going to want the cliffhanger ending. And each one came back and said, oh, you have to go with that ending. You have to do that. So I did. And then I was like, okay, well, I'm going to immediately have to follow up with the 4th book. The sequel to that is called In Darkness, Light Shines. I immediately set out to write that. I was like, I'm going to have this out within a few months of the other one. It's not fair to the readers. And that's the one that took forever to get. It didn't take forever to write. I wrote it pretty quick, but then it just took forever to go through the editing and publishing process. It took like an extra 7 months. Usually I can have a book done in 6 to 9 months. I think that one took like 1 year and 4 months. It was so, and everybody's like, where is this book? You left us hanging. So if that's probably the one sideshow that I've had in the writing so far. And it was fun. I really enjoyed writing the sequel because I had to resolve the situation that was left at the end of Los Angeles. And it took the whole book to do it. And I think it was the best of the 4 books that I've published so far. So it was really rewarding at the end.
Of course, they can find your books on Amazon.com and other places where fine books are sold.
Yeah.
Is there any particular thing you want to make sure that your readers will get from your time on this podcast?
Well, along that line first, I do have a website coming out. It'll be www.johngaltrobinson.com, which is, you had my email, john@johngaltrobinson.com, so the domain's already there. My person that's doing my website, she should have it up pretty quick. I'm trying to get a mailing list going as well, which is another way I can share this podcast with.
Right.
But so that's going to be big. We're going to do things on that website, and I'm going to have a lot of the charities I support around there. In fact, I mentioned some in books, in these books, because my books deal with dark subjects. Especially the first one, Forces of Redemption, and Lost Angels. They both deal with human trafficking and the cartels. Those are dark subjects. And it was challenging to write those in a way where you're letting the reader know what's happening without getting too descriptive. My books don't have language in them. There's no depicted sex, but you know what's happening when you're dealing with people that are being trafficked. I don't know if you saw the movie last year, The Sound of Freedom. It was eerily similar to my books, and they did a great job. They took you right up to the point that you knew what was going to happen, like you saw a man walking off with a small child, but they didn't show any of that. But it was enough to... No, they don't, but it was enough to infuriate you. And
yes,
afterwards, one of the charities that I work with is called Lighthouse for Life, and they actually help women that have been trafficked, victims of human trafficking. It's a Christian-based organization. They help them restore these women, get them back on 2 feet, and be able to function again in society. And I called the president. Her name's Lisa Kerr. And I called her up after my wife and I walked out of the Sound of Freedom. I was like, Lisa, you need to get down here, get a desk set up with all your information. People are going to walk out of this movie and they are going to be furious about what's going on when they learn about all the human trafficking, especially the child trafficking, and they're going to want to know how to get involved. And if you're right there with answers, it's going to make a huge difference. Because it ran, I think, for 2 weeks in the theaters, and there was some really good turnout with that. But so it's the same thing with my books. My books will deal with dark subjects, and when you read them, you're like, ooh, I'm not sure. Like, even you, when you looked at my books at first, you're like, I'm not sure these are Christian. But I assure you they are.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're clean. Go ahead.
No, I did appreciate you clarifying that, because I thought, how can you there's got to be a lot of horrible language in this to make it, to drive your point home. That's the easy way to write. But I appreciate that it's not in there, and I certainly appreciate you assuring me. And so I did some I read some samples of your work, and I said, wow, yeah, I got to have this guy on the podcast, because
Thank you.
I think it's very important that Christians and Christian writers don't shy away from the world that we live in. It's a fallen world. You're true to yourself, true to the Word, and that's what we need.
Well, we're to be ambassadors, and I have.
Yes.
That's some of the feedback I've gotten. In fact, one of my Navy SEAL contacts, and he's a Christian, but he said, hey, it would be a lot more authentic if you started dropping some F-bombs in this part. And I was like, I'm not going to cross that line. I said, in fact, Clive Cussler, one of the greatest thriller authors of all time, and I don't think he was a Christian, but his books didn't have language. And he was a bestseller, international bestseller. And his books are fantastic reads. And that was the thing. He said, I'm not writing a book that I wouldn't want my teenage kids to read. So he shied away from the language. He shied away from any depicted sex. And like I said, mine deal with some dark subjects, and you'll hear about it, but you don't see it. And you don't have to hear the language. And I've had a few other people. In fact, one of my nephews who was a Marine, and he's been a source for several of my novels too. In fact, I made him a character in my 5th novel. His name is Micah, and he's just a great guy. He makes me look like a pencil neck geek, but he was an air service or an airframe technician on the VH-22 Osprey, and just a character. I didn't have to make anything up. I just wrote who he is and just changed the name a little bit. But he even said, this is the Marine Corps. This isn't authentic. There's no language in here. I'm like, that's how it's going to be, man. But after the first book, he actually wrote me back. He's not a Christian, but he said, wow, Uncle John, said, I really enjoyed the book. I felt like a fly on the wall in every scene. Said, and normally I wouldn't care for the faith content, but you've got me thinking. And that was all I needed to hear. Yeah. And then another friend last year, after reading In Darkness Light Shines, he texted me. He said, I've never gone to church. I've never been interested. He said, but I think I need to start reading the Bible. Is there one you recommend? I was like, touchdown. That's all you can ask for. It was fantastic.
Exactly.
And and here he's a secular reader, but enjoyed the books. And he wasn't reading because he's a Christian wanting Christian content. He enjoyed the story regardless, but it planted a little seed and it made him think. So really, that's to God be the glory, because I don't have the talent to do that. Only God could do that. But I agree with you. I think we are to be ambassadors. My books are going to be a little different, but I think there's still going to be great, appealing stories, and they don't need all that content. I work in rural South Carolina. I'm in the middle of the Bible Belt in the emergency department. But, the language that goes around between the majority of staff around me is pretty thick. And it's that's the way society is today. We hear our presidents say it now. And I'm not saying it's right. It's not. But, it's incorporated in every part of society. But that's a line I'm not going to cross in my book. Well, if people don't want it, that's okay.
Well, John, I have really appreciated this time. We've talked 52 minutes, something like that. But you've been a great guest. I appreciate you coming on. And
appreciate it.
God bless, and thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. I appreciate it. Well, let me pray for you before we go. Is that okay?
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
Heavenly Father, I just thank you, Lord. I don't think there's any such thing as a coincidence. There's always divine appointments. And I just thank you that Mike and I were able to connect. And Lord, I just pray your blessing upon him. Lord, give him wisdom and guidance. May he keep his eyes fixed upon you, the author and perfecter of our faith, as you guide him through this process with the podcast, with the books that he writes. I pray you'll continue to inspire, Lord, and just write through him stories that will appeal to many people. And Lord, as we both just give it to you. I like what Dallas Jenkins says. We offer you the loaves and fishes, and then you do it with what you want, whether you multiply it to feed millions or just a couple people. Whatever your plan is, that's fine. Fame and fortune are fleeting. That's not what we're after. We're here to glorify you, to add to your kingdom, to get the word out to other people, that people might just pick up our book and it might inspire them to listen to your word, to hear from you, or to seek you, or to someday accept you as Lord and Savior. So through Mike's ministry and mine of writing, and through Mike's podcast, I pray that you'll do great things. I pray that you'll show him exactly what you want him to do, and I pray that you'll bless every effort. Just help him to grow closer to you through this, and with everything we do, may you be glorified. And we thank you in advance for the good work you'll do. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
And well, thank you very much. Well, Mike, I appreciate it.
Thank you for your time, sir.
You too.
God
Thank
bless.
you. All right.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye. I hope you have enjoyed this episode as much as I have. I think we really learned a lot about what John puts into his writing. He has tackled some difficult situations, things that are going on close to us, maybe not right in our backyard, but we know about them. And he's written interesting stories that brings those situations to light, like trafficking human beings. You know, our last episode was James L. Rubart. Very interesting. And this episode with John, I'm looking forward to our next one. I hope you will join us. Now that you're becoming familiar with the authors, I hope you will look for their books. A quick personal note, I've been recording authors since January. Now in March, I'm having to record the start and end for these podcasts. I wish I'd have thought of that when I was recording the interviews. It was a rookie mistake. I'll get better, I promise. What makes things look out of step is I'm preparing to play a Pharisee in our church's Easter drama, Lead Me to the Cross. Hence, the beard has to grow. I like it. The wife, not so much. I'm very glad you were able to join us. I hope you will help us keep the lights on here at the Wordsmith Forge by subscribing to our podcast. Hit the like button and share us on your media sites. Christian fiction is a great way to demonstrate biblical principles. With your help, we can spread the good news. As you just heard John say, his nephew said, "Your book has got me thinking." And I think their work gets lots of people thinking. But we have to get the books in front of people so they can become interested. Until next time, may God's grace be evident in your life. This is Mike Baines, out.